What are the latest figures when it comes to violence against women in Canada?
Well, gender-based violence continues to be a significant problem in Canada. Worldwide, we know that 1 in 3 women and girls will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And those numbers are reflective of the situation in Canada. You're right that since the start of the pandemic, we have seen an increase in the rates of violence against women, including femicide, as you've just mentioned. And as I understand from the work that's being done at the Canadian Femicide Observatory, in the first 6 months of 2021, 92 women have been killed in Canada. And those numbers are an increase from the same time period in 2019 and 2020. We've also seen increases in domestic violence and sexual violence. And so it's really important when we're talking about these statistics to really think about what are the social conditions that are creating this increase in violence, and certainly the pandemic and the inequalities that the pandemic has created and exposed is something we really need to look at.
Some very saddening numbers there, ma'am. Now, violence can come in many forms. There's physical abuse, psychological abuse, and sometimes it's hard for someone to recognize that they're being abused by a loved one. So how can someone recognize these patterns of abusive behavior?
Yeah, you're right that there is many different forms of violence. And if someone is feeling unsafe, if they're feeling like they're maybe being manipulated or controlled, if they feel like they're being forced to do something that they don't want to do, all of these can be signs that there may be violence or abuse taking place. It sometimes can be easier to recognize violence when it's physical or sexual. These are often the types of violence that we hear a lot more about. But certainly there is violence that can be psychological, economic. We can see stalking, harassment, and other forms of controlling behavior. So I would encourage anyone, if you are feeling uncertain about something that's maybe happening in a relationship or a situation that you're in, if you're feeling unsafe, to reach out to a supportive person in your life and have a conversation about that.
And speaking about support systems, what is the current state of support for victims of abuse in Canada?
Sure. So there are a number of different types of supports available. There are domestic violence shelters and transition houses. There are community-based sexual assault centers for those who have experienced sexual violence. There's often resources in community-based health centers and hospitals. There's lots of interesting and supportive peer support and survivor-led initiatives that are also happening. So there are a number of supports out there, but we also know that many of these organizations and networks that provide these services are continuously struggling to ensure that they have the resources necessary to meet that demand. And that also, depending on where you live in Canada, you may face additional challenges in seeking that support. And I'm thinking particularly of those living in northern and rural and remote communities across the country. So while there are really wonderful services that are staffed by a very resilient and creative network of people who want to support survivors, there's always ongoing work to do to ensure that there is equitable access for everyone who needs that type of support.
All right, Ms. Whitmore, thank you again for joining us today and sharing this important message with us.
Great, thanks for having me.
Stay tuned. Up next, we take a look at stories making news around the world. A deadly tragedy in the English Channel, riots in the Solomon Islands, and Interpol elects a controversial new president. These stories and more when we return on the Forum Daily, so stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break.